Good evening, everyone. How are you feeling today?
Good.
Good. Excellent. I'm feeling good, and whenever I talk about this topic that I'm gonna present today, I feel a special sense of responsibility, even higher than I typically feel when I come here, which is a high sense, but today is even higher. So I'm going to talk about Earth is Our Home. You all know the book of Chico Xavier, Our Home, right? Well, not about the book. It's a different topic. Let me beginning by explaining why I'm presenting this to you guys today. You know who that is? You know who that guy is?
Gore.
That's one. Very good. And the guy next to him? Al Gore. Yes, that's Al Gore. That's the vice president of the U.S. with Clinton. The reason why I put up that picture and why I want to tell you a little bit about that background is because maybe you've guessed already. Today I'm going to talk about global warming, climate change, environment, the Earth, our home, and Gore, he started with this many years before he became vice president. He wrote a book like about 500 pages. Very few people have read it, Earth in the Balance, basically saying the same things that he's saying today, like he keeps saying today, and which are the things that the scientific community has been saying for decades, for many decades now. Then around the year 2003, after he had stepped out of a public office, he was already working on this, trying to spread the word about climate change, and he happened to become partner of our company in Spain. So he would come about 3-4 times a year to work with us. And every time he came, he would ask, please gather a group of people, whether media, politicians, influencers, whatever, anybody, because I want to talk to them about the climate crisis. So we would organize those kind of small gatherings, small events, and he would present a version of this presentation that I bring today. Now, since few people speak English in Spain, that's a fact, I had to translate every time. That's how I started my translation career, which I now use here at Broward Spiritist Society. So I repeated this, not this one, but a similar presentation many times. Then that presentation became a documentary in 2006, An Inconvenient Truth. It went to win an Oscar, and mainly what it did is brought to the public and to the conversation, social conversation, the issue of the climate crisis. So with that, let's go, because there's a lot to talk about. So let's see how we do. You guys know about this picture? You know the name of the picture? What is it? Earth. Yeah, this picture is called Earthrise, and it was taken by the Apollo 8 mission. So this is 1968, 1 year before landing on the moon. The mission was recognizing spots to land, and they orbited on the dark side of the moon. When they came out of the dark side, they saw this, and they took the picture. So this became the first image that we had of our home, of the Earth, from space. And it became really important. And it was part of the starting of the modern environmentalist movement. Now this picture, it's also very interesting. It was taken by another Apollo mission, Apollo 17 in 1972. So I was just about 3 months old when they took this picture. And it's interesting because the Apollo was coming back from the moon, and at that point when they took the picture, the sun and the moon were in such a position that they could take the picture with the full and see the full circumference of the Earth circle, and with no dark spots. For many, many decades, it was the only picture that we had with the full Earth taken from space. So this picture, it's very simple and very important because it kind of showed, it made the point of a big part of what we're going to talk today. This was taken from the International Space Station, and it's we could say it's a sunrise. So you see the edge of the Earth, and that's how you see it from the ISS, and the sun is coming out. That kind of blue band, that's the atmosphere. And why this picture is important, it's because we have the misconception that the atmosphere is this huge amount of air that we have above our heads. And in reality, and the picture shows that, it's very thin and very fragile. If you take an orange, just so you get the picture, and you put a thin layer of vernice over the of paint over the orange, that would be the atmosphere as compared to the Earth. From Broward Spiritist Society to the end of the atmosphere, it's shorter than from here to the airport. So,
which airport?
Any, really. I think, yeah, I think any of them, but definitely Miami. It's way, way longer to get to Miami airport than it is to get to the end of the atmosphere. So, you get the idea of, huh?
20 miles in each side.
Yeah, yeah. We have about 18 kilometers of air, more or less. So yeah, and yeah, and this picture gave that information. So why is that important? I'm going to talk about the warming effect and how that works. Probably most of you know about it, the house warming effect and the greenhouse, sorry, thank you, effect. So the way it works is that we get the radiation from the sun in the form of light waves. Those light waves hit the Earth, they go through the atmosphere, they hit the Earth, and they warm the Earth. The Earth absorbs those light waves. Now, once that's happened, and that's a good thing because that allows life in the planet as we know it, part of that radiation goes back into space in the form of infrared waves. And just some part of those infrared waves get trapped in the atmosphere and back to Earth. And they get trapped by the greenhouse gases. So mainly CO2, methane, water vapor, mainly. There are others, but those are the main ones. So what that does is creates a specific temperature, which the average of it for the Earth is about 15 degrees centigrade. I don't know how much that is. I should know that. Probably about 52, 55, or 60 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. That's the average temperature of the Earth. Now, we said greenhouse gases and CO2 amongst them. What we're doing is we are spilling gases all day, every day, 110 million tons. And that may not mean much to you right now, but we're gonna go into it. The effect of that, of course, is that the more CO2, the more of those infrared waves get trapped, and the more the Earth heats up. And it's little by little, but it keeps on happening, and we're going to see that. There are many sources for those greenhouse gas, for that CO2 and the greenhouse gases, man-made sources, but I'm just going to focus on one of them, which is the burning of fossil fuels. And we have a graph here. If you can see, the graph starts in 1850 and it goes all the way to today. This is 2016. And this is pollution in the form of fossil fuels. Why it starts in 1850? It's not because Kardec was working on the Spirit's book at the time, but because of two things. One is the Industrial Revolution. It was starting at the time. And the other one is that's when we started having global registries of the temperature around the globe, like measured, scientifically measured every day, and we have that data, so that we can compare also these with temperature. Now, today, CO2 is being released into the atmosphere at a rate faster than any time in history for the past 66 million years. We do have data of those 66 million years, and the reason why we don't have from before, it's because that's when the asteroid hit Mexico, so we can't really get data from before, but 66 million years, it's a very long time. So we know all these cycles of the CO2 and the temperature for that long. And I don't have any of those here, but if you look at them, they correlate. So CO2 and temperature, they go together. And we do have natural cycles on Earth. That's a thing. Just not to the extent that we do have them today. I was saying 110 tons a day. It doesn't say much to you, but just think about it in terms of the Hiroshima bomb. That's the equivalent of 400,000 Hiroshima bombs every day of the year. So it is the amount of energy as if we were releasing 400,000 Hiroshima bombs per day. That's what we're doing. And you may say, yeah, okay, you've made a point. The atmosphere is not too big, but it doesn't seem to be a problem. Well, it's starting to show on many aspects, and we're going to see a few of them. Just so you start getting the picture of those changes, this is a graph of the average temperatures in the northern hemisphere during the summer. So what this represents, the blue part, it represents the cooler than average days in a summer. This is the average days in a summer, and this is the hotter than average days. And we're gonna use this baseline, which is the behavior of the summer days, the temperature in summer, over the period 1951 to 1980. And that's the baseline. If we go to 83 to 93, now we start seeing a shift, right? And we get a new category here, which we didn't have before, which is extremely hot days. It's not warmer than average, it's extremely hot. This is 94 to 2004. It's shifted even more, and more hotter days. And this is pretty much today. And if you can see, it goes like that. Just so we get the picture, the extreme temperature events used to cover 0.1%, 0.1% of the Earth. They cover today 14.5% of the Earth. 17 out of 18 hottest years on record have occurred since the year 2001. And remember, we have those records since 1850. The 4 hottest years ever since we have a reached record of temperature have been the last 4. This is just some examples. May 2018, so this year, this May was the hottest on record in the United States. This is the United Arab States. They reached last year 124 Fahrenheit. And in Kuwait, they reached 129. Now, this is the global temperature, the 4 independent records that we have from the UK, 2 from the US, NASA, NOAA, and 1 from Japan. They all basically say the same thing. So from 1850, it's a increasing pattern. And this is the air temperature. So this is the average temperature at this level where we are. The big issue, and well, no, I shouldn't say that. That's a big issue. But an even bigger issue is that 90% of the increase in temperature of that extra heat, it goes to the oceans, and it stays in the oceans. And that's the big unknown. Big because the oceans are huge, and they can take a lot. But also the unknown is really big. We don't really know much of what happens. We know some, and it's already kind of scary enough or bad enough. If we look at the ocean temperatures, same thing, same pattern. This is a graph from 1960 to today, and 2017 was the hottest year on record for the ocean temperatures, global ocean temperatures. This is the heat content in the ocean, and you can see at different levels, from the surface to 300 meters, 300 to 700 meters, 2 kilometers, and deeper. And of course, it varies, but in all of them, it's increasing. Now, half of that increase has occurred within the last 20 years. And again, you may say, well, I take a swim and it seems okay, maybe a little warmer, which could even be good. But no, it is a big issue. This is a graph of Harvey last year, Hurricane Harvey, that hit Houston. Now, this hurricane happened the way it happened because the temperature in the Gulf waters was 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher than normal, up to 200 meters deep. So it made the hurricane become from what it was, a tropical storm. In just 2 days before landing, it became a Category 5. That had never happened before in the Gulf, first time. This is Irma, and of course we probably all of us have seen this picture, but I just wanted to bring it back to remind us of the size of Irma. As you can read there, it is since we have tracking over satellite of the hurricanes, this is the first one that remained for 3 days straight a Category 5. And it hit more places than I'm going to show you, but just so you get the picture, this is September 8th, the Virgin Islands, September 10th, Cuba, September 11th, the Keys. FEMA estimates that 25% of the houses were destroyed and 65% were significantly damaged. So this is one of the main messages, one of the main things. There is a link between the crisis, the climate crisis, and events, climatic events that are extreme. Now, we say global warming, and I've heard this. Then all of a sudden we have a cold wave, a very cold wave, and they say, oh, where's the global warming? What is happening now? Well, it's not that the Earth is just going to heat up and we're going to burn here. This is the main thing. The main thing is that we are affecting, through our action, the balance that the Earth, the climatic balance that the Earth has. And we are changing that balance. And what that's making is that we are seeing, and we will see more often and more extreme climatic events. And in places where they didn't used to happen, places where maybe it rained all throughout the year a little bit, or in a few months a little bit, now it's all concentrated. And then you get a drought for a few years, and then back to heavy rains, and the patterns are changing. Just so we get the image, remember Sandy? I think it was 212, New York. Sandy, that kind of hurricane, the risk of it in 1880, it was 1 in 500 years that could happen. 2017, last year, 1 in 25 years that could happen. If we keep on going like we are, it will be a 1 in 5 year event by the mid of this century. There have been 15 1 in 1,000 year events, downpour events in the US since May of 2010. So this is what we all know, the cycle of water. We know there's evaporation from the oceans and the rivers and the lakes, and then it rains, and then the water runs back to the sea, and then it evaporates again. So what's happening is we are affecting that cycle. We have seen that the temperature has gone up, the average temperature. So there's warmer air. Warmer air will hold more water vapor. With each additional degree Celsius of temperature, the atmosphere is going to hold 7% more of water vapor. So right now, we have 5% more water vapor in the oceans, or over the oceans, that we had 30 years ago. That makes those storms bigger and bigger. And that, combined with the temperature of the ocean, makes them stronger and stronger. So the downpours get bigger. See this event? This is New Mexico, but we have a few of those. That kind of a storm, the storm itself, it could be up to more than 1,000 miles wide, the storm itself. Now, imagine you have a bathtub full of water, which is 1,000 miles wide, full of water. And then you open a small hole, just a few miles on it, and all the water from the tub is going to pour over that place. That's what's happening with these kind of events. This is a graph of worldwide extreme weather catastrophes. And we have gone from an average of 200 to 300 events worldwide in 1980. And those are storms, floods, mudslides, and droughts and fires. We have gone from 200 to 300 average to 600 to 700 average right now. This picture is 5 days old. This is Northern California. This is happening now. Another fact, a fire season in the US West, now it's 105 days longer than it was in 1970. Of course, hotter years make more fires, and that they go hand in hand. Now, this image, I want you to pay attention. You can't really see, but it's giving us the scale here. This is about 100 miles. So that's probably a satellite image of Russia of about 2,000 miles, maybe, something like that. Every one of those red dots are fires. And this is smoke. These are not clouds. This is smoke. So why I want you to think about that. This happened in Russia in 2010. So first of all, they had their worst drought in history for the years coming up to 2010. And they have records of precipitation in Russia that go back 1,000 years. So for a long time, they had never had that kind of drought. Then that year, they had the worst fires that they've ever had. This is a picture of Moscow on August 9th, 2010. Now, 55,000 people died of that event. And this is a picture of one of those places where the fires were happening. But being this bad, this is not why I'm showing you this. Why is because 4 months later, world food prices reached record highs. So in the event, in the drought and the fires, they lost a big percentage of their crops. So Russia and Ukraine, but Russia mainly, they are #1 exporters of wheat. And they had to cut down because they needed for themselves. So they cut completely the supply to many countries. What happens? The prices go up, right? Now, this is a graph of those prices, food prices. We have two peak record food prices spikes within 3 years on that period. And this is an image from La Paz in Bolivia, but this happened all over the world in different countries. There were riots and there were protests. If you read Spanish, it says the people want bread and the people are hungry. That's what they're saying. And these protests were happening in different places. This December of that year in Tunisia, I don't know if you guys remember this, but what sparked the Arab Spring, I mean, it was probably bound to happen, but the spark that lighted up was this guy. He burned himself. He was a street vendor in Tunisia, and he set himself on fire. And his last words were not down with the dictator or, down with Gaddafi or anything, or this is Tunisia, not Gaddafi. But those were not his last words. His last words were, how am I supposed to live? He couldn't make a living anymore. And this is the same year, 2010, and it's coming to something that probably touches us a little bit more even than that. These are the words of a Syrian farmer in October 2010. I had 400 acres of wheat and now it's all desert. Between 2006 and 2010, the drought killed the crops and turned 60% of Syria's fertile land into desert. That happened those 4 years. And what happened, and about 80% of the cattle died. About 1.5 million people had to leave the farms and the fields and go to the cities that were overpopulated already. There was a lot of pressure. Then that combined with the same kind of issue from Iraq and also those refugees. They fled Iraq and went to Syria. So that paved the way for the war that it's still going on today and that we have heard so much about, and the refugees crisis and all of that. You can, I haven't really on the mass media seen that connection, not for Syria, not for Russia, not for Africa. I did cut the Africa slides because otherwise we'd be here until Sunday. But what's happening in Africa is also huge. But this is the connection. And you can see many articles and many places where they do make the connection between the climate problems and war and people having to leave their homes and just seek to keep living and to keep feeding their families. And that's a fact. as I said, refugees camps, not just in Syria. I'm using Syria as an example because we see it more in the news, but not just in Syria. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a refugee camp. It's, I've been here in Shatila, in Beirut. I don't really have words to describe the energy of those places, and I don't. It's overwhelming. It's one of those really strong experiences that I've had. That one in particular was established in 1949, and there's 22,000 people, forgotten people. That was my feeling there. And the thing is, and why I bring this is because all these climate changes, they have an impact over the food and the water of millions of people. And they cannot do anything but move. And they move, many times they have to move into these refugee camps, which are huge in many places. It is possible that in the Middle East and North Africa, some regions will be inhabitable, will become inhabitable. This is just one example. In Iran, 2015, they reached 165 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the what they call the heat index. What is the heat index? It's a combination of the temperature and the humidity. And of course, you cannot live on 165. There's no way anybody can live there. So there are regions that are more at risk because of this: Persian Gulf, Northern India, Eastern China. That means billions of people. Okay, so all of these, what's doing is it's affecting the system as a whole. So we're saying that the system is vulnerable to these. We have one global system, and it's vulnerable to these changes. So we get those kind of disruptions, we get wars, we get all of that, political and societal instability. It affects food supply, water, global health, infrastructure. I'm not going to go into detail in all of those because then again we'd be here for a long time. But just want to paint the picture a little. Food, all of these are interconnected and affected. Just going to talk about droughts. This is this year, Germany. Because of the drought in Germany and Poland, the crops of wheat will go down 6%. Heat also affects. Every degree centigrade of warming will bring down the crops of corn 7.4%, wheat 6%, also rice, soy. And these four crops, they make 2/3 of all the humanity caloric intake, those four crops. So more temperature, you can connect the dots and see what happens. Nutrition. Also, we found that more concentration of CO2, that means less nutrients of those crops. So you're giving someone the same amount of rice, and it is not feeding the person the same, it's feeding the person less. Global health. I want to bring, there's all of those, and again, they're interconnected. Health-related issues, water, mental health, allergens, heat stress, and so on. I want to bring one of them, which is infectious disease, because it's right here. Now, one of the things climate change is doing, it is making the environment better for some infectious diseases and easier for them to spread because their living conditions were restricted to some areas and now they are wider. And one of the things that it's happening, and this is, I found it's a global phenomenon, but it's happening right here. This is what they call the red tide, algae bloom. This is Lake Utah, and this is Lake Erie. This is this year. And this is right here in Florida, in Martin County. Now, this is a combination of different factors. One of them is the rising temperature that gives more space for the algae, and the other one is the nutrients. They feed off nitrates and phosphates, and we use those in agriculture mainly. So that those nitrates and phosphates, we use them with our crops, then they go into the water system, and then they evaporate, and then they fall, and so on. This is just a cartoon to depict a little bit of what is happening, because we have to think that everything is interconnected. So the way we are getting our crops, it's interconnected with what's happening. Also, our residues and our water, sewage, and so on, they just found this year with a study that it has a big impact on that algae bloom. This is 2015. From Alaska to Mexico, all the fisheries were closed due to this algae problem. Now, did you know that sex in sea turtles was determined by temperature?
No.
And other fishes also, like sea bream, they depending on different factors and temperature, they change sex. So they are not born male or female and stay like that. They may change. Yeah. But the thing is, and this is from Australia, northern of the Great Barrier Reef, 99% of the young sea turtles are now females. Now, do the math. It's very easy, right? Marine vertebrates declined 49% on average from 1970 to 2012. This is a message from Pope Francis. In 2015, he wrote an encyclica. That's a letter for the Catholics, which is like a very important document for them. And it was a letter entitled On Care for Our Common Home. And he brought all these messages. And of course, saying global warming and climate change are a fact, and it's man-made pollution. But regarding this loss of biodiversity, he was saying we don't have the right to do that, and we're doing that. It is a natural process, the extinction process. We have seen, I think, up to 5 mass extinctions on Earth, but none, and we are living the 6th one now, but none at the rate that this one is happening. This is also a global phenomena, and I'm just going to show you one example, but think about it happening all over the place. Same thing. This is a glacier in Greenland in the summer of 1935. This is the summer of 2013. Again, this is happening everywhere. This is the data from the ice mass in Greenland. Now, same thing happening with the North Pole. I have the pictures, but I didn't bring those. But the North Pole is melting, literally melting. Now that's okay, in the sense that if the North Pole melts, it's water, it's ice that it's in the ocean, so it's not gonna level, it's not gonna rise the level of the sea. But if Greenland, because it's like if you have an ice cube on a glass of water, if it melts, it's just gonna stay at the same level. But now Greenland, it's ice on Earth. If that melts and it's melting, and if the North Pole melts, that will melt next. That's gonna raise the level. Here in Miami, we have tides, surges from the tides, and when the hurricanes come, they say the biggest issue is not the hurricane itself, is the surge of the water. And that's the big deal. It's happening here when there's no rain. So you get South Beach all flooded. And that's supposed to be a video of South Beach, but the videos are not running for some reason. So you get the picture. Kiribati is a country. That's the whole country. They're buying land for their climate, for the people, climate refugees, because their country's more than likely going to disappear. Now, all of that is the cost of carbon. That, we've been talking, some things I talked about them, some others I didn't even go into them, but it's a huge cost. And this picture, I bring it to remind us of what happened. This is the eastern island off the coast of Chile. It's about, I think, 3,000 some miles of Chile. There's nothing 3,000 miles around of the eastern island. And there was once a civilization there. And it was an island full of trees and ecosystem and so on, and they made decisions. And the decisions they made brought the island to a systemic collapse. So basically they disappeared. And this happened in one island, confined space, but we are on risk of systemic collapse on Earth. I brought this text from a book by Joanna De Angelis. It was psychographed by Divaldo Franco, and I believe it's 1974. She is talking about all these things back then, about ecology. It's basically a book about ecology. And here she's saying that in the Earth, it says it's being victimized by the clash of vibrations, waves, and minds in this ray as a result of unloving, unbridled ambitions, systematic hates. And she's saying that, of course, war is one of the consequences, but our life is going to show those consequences at home, at work, in our communities. It is within us that lack of love. And that lack of love that is within me, it's causing all of those things that I'm talking about. Now, fortunately, we do have the solutions. They are at our hand, at our disposal. And I know the vibration here is kind of low now, by now. Yeah, it's almost in the ground. So I'm gonna give a few hopeful facts, which are a reality already. And one of the solutions lies within, of course, energy is one of the big issues. And green energy, it's part of the solution. There was a projection in the year 2000 that the world would reach 30 gigawatts of green energy by the year 2010. Well, in 2017, we have exceeded that by a factor of 18. And there's a lot of information about this, and I'm just gonna bring a few things, okay? Keep that in mind too. Globally, the wind could give us enough energy 40 times over of what we need, just if we harness the wind energy, if we decided to do that. Now, solar energy, which is another one, the projection in 22, it was that it would grow 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. The reality, it was exceeded by 17, factor of 17. In 2017, so last year, it was exceeded by a factor of almost 100. This is what they call the levelized cost of energy in the US. Levelized means that if you take out all the subsidies and disruptions of the system, you get the true cost of energy. Now, this is nuclear energy, is the most expensive one. This is coal energy. This is the gas combined cycle. And these two are the renewables that I brought, solar and wind. So it's a matter of time, because even if we go by economic standards, it's happening. It's going to happen. The new electric capacity in the U.S., how the electricity is growing in the U.S., last year 62% was from solar and wind, and the other big chunk was natural gas, which is still contaminating, but it's the least contaminating of them. This is a coal mining museum in Kentucky. You know, Kentucky, it's part of the coal belt, of those states of the coal belt. Some even say, and I'll go to a different story now, that you make the numbers, and in the 2000 elections, Gore will say, well, he lost Florida, he lost the election, right? Because those 526 votes. But really, if he would have carried his state, which he didn't, which is very rare for a candidate not to carry his own state, he would have become president. But his state is part of this coal belt. And of course they knew he was going to end coal. But anyway, that's another story. This one is about this museum, which is in Kentucky. Last year, guess what they did? They went solar. They installed, the mining coal museum installed solar energy because they estimated they were going to save between $8,000 and $10,000 per year. So this is probably the single best slide for me. For years, it's been on my mind and on my heart. We get enough energy from the sun in 1 hour to fulfill all the needs of the world in 1 year. So we have to harness that. We have to go for that. It's given to us. It's been given to us. And I thought of this with this question of the Spirits book. Well, this is 160 years ago, and Kardec, when he compiled the Spirits book, he wasn't facing these problems. But surprisingly, or maybe not, he left a map of this exact problem and many others. But he portrayed this already. We have a map of what to do and how to do it. Now there's one chapter which is about the law of destruction, and I could really talk about the full chapter, but I won't do that again because we'll be here till Sunday. And I didn't want to make it a study of that chapter, but the whole issue. But everything is related, and I brought up a few things for us to think about. Question 733 of the Spirits book asks, will destruction always be necessary for human beings on earth? Because there is destruction, right? What do you think? No? Yes? Well, Spirit said that the need for destruction decreases in humans as their spirits obtain control over matter. And this is why intellectual and moral development is always accompanied by an aversion to destruction. So now this makes sense. And the efforts that we're doing to get there, both intellectually and morally, make sense. So those two battles are worth fighting for. And on that note, and on that kind of battle, countries that are planning a fossil fuel vehicle phase out. So take all the gas vehicles and throw them in the trash. Well, recycle them, of course. Norway is planning, it has determined to do that by 2025, Netherlands 2030, and you have a number of other countries. Some are thinking, some are setting the date. They have decided, like Germany. China is saying in the near future. China is doing a lot of effort in this respect. France, Britain, a bit later, but they have decided to do that already. So that's happening. In the US, solar energy jobs are growing 9 times faster than the overall economy. And again, from that book of by the Spirit, Joanna de Angelis, she's saying here that the great nations became so blinded by technology, by greed, by progress, by what computers were going to give us, that we're not realizing of what was happening, really, of the consequences of all this, which is everything we've been talking about here for maybe almost an hour. I don't know, sorry, maybe too long, but she said, and she says here that created proud and vain creatures. But she said in 1974 that we were going to wake up from that and that we were going to stop and modify. So she was already seeing what we're doing now and the way we're moving now. 2015, Paris Agreements, you've probably heard about that because basically all nations in the world, they agreed to go emissions neutral by 2050, by mid-century be neutral in fossil fuel emissions, carbon emissions. Now that's huge. And we've all heard that the US has said that it's going to withdraw from the Paris Agreements. Now the small print to that, which we don't hear, but it's there, and I have to speak up and say it, is that legally, because of the way of the US legal system and the international treaties, that is not going to happen until after the 2020 election. So only after that can legally happen, meaning that we still have a shot. There's the 2020 election and we can do something about it. 16 states have already committed to higher standard in the US. I have all of them there. 130 global companies have made a commitment to 100% renewable energy consumption. US cities committed to 100% renewable electricity, and 5 of them already there. 5 cities already 100%. This is a great story. This is a 14-year-old guy in Africa, in Malawi. He had to leave school at the age of 14. He went to a local library. He got some schematics, some blueprints of how to build a windmill, and he did it, and he gave electricity to all his village. So if he can do that, can't we solve the crisis? Now, he's from a place where that was very much needed and where they're suffering the most, and he found a way, but most of them, they don't have the means. And we cannot forget, and the Pope, again, on that letter, he's reminding that the harshest consequences of the climate crisis are for the poorest countries and the poorest people within a country. On that chapter of the law of destruction, Kardec is asking, is destruction a law of nature? And you've probably guessed, well, the spirits say, and this is very interesting also, everything must be destroyed so that it may be renewed. What you call destruction is only a transformation to renew and improve living things. I read that. I said, Juan, you're okay. You're destroying the planet. You're helping to renew the planet. You're fine. You know, everything is fine. You're on the right track. Kardec said that. You're okay. Yeah. But no, right? And this is a joke a little bit. I'm joking with it, but it's serious because most of us humans, and spiritists in particular, we tend to minimize this issue of the climate crisis, and we tend to say, well, things like spirit life is what matters, you know, so. Or there are many mansions in my father's house, so you know we'll get another one. Let's destroy this one, no problem. We'll get another one. Well, no, and as I say, Kardec didn't face this issue, but he was a researcher and very intelligent, and he was very well guided, And you go just one question farther up, and he's asking the spirits, because he sees that, okay, there is destruction, but there's means of preservation. And the living things have means of preservation, and we have means of self-preservation and of preservation of the earth. And he knew that we were one with the biosphere. He knew that. So he asked, why does nature surround us with means of preservation and conservation? And the spirits said, so that the destruction only happens at the right time. Premature destruction delays the development of the intelligent principle. And then it came to me. I'm delaying my own development. With all of this, what all of this means is no more and no less than my own development, our own spiritual development. It's linked. Everything is connected. And this is what I'm doing. If I don't act, I'm simply delaying my own spiritual development. It's late, so I'm just going to jump through that. And quickly, do you know this picture? This was taken by the Voyager, and at some point, 1990, it was exploring the solar system, and it turned the cameras back and took this picture, and that's the Earth. That inspired Carl Sagan's The Pale Blue Dot. And you can see how small, how beautiful it is. This is the Earth from Saturn, from the rings of Saturn. And we can barely see, but that small dot over there, that's Earth from Mars. This picture is taken by the rover Curiosity. And these days, if you go to the beach where there's less light pollution, you can see Mars as a very bright point in the sky. When I see that, I think, hey, that's how Earth looks from Mars. And that's beautiful. And that's Earth, that's our home, and that's our responsibility. And it's the responsibility of our own spiritual evolution, our own spiritual path. My spiritual evolution is linked to the Earth. It's one and the same thing. So what I do with Earth, I'm doing with myself. Thank you.